In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your legwarmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the Long Rewind. Welcome to the Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa. With me, as always, is Dustin.
Hola.
And today we're talking about the action heroes of the 1980s, I believe.
Yeah. Action stars.
Action stars.
So a case can be made that the 80s were the golden era of the, well, maybe not of the action movie, because we still have a lot of action movies. Although you might make that case because we didn't yet have CGI.
Right. So it was all in camera or mostly
so there's
in camera.
There's something tactile and more exciting to me, about watching like
practical
an old Mad Max. I mean, this was the thing about Fury Road when it came out so many years ago, right?
Yeah.
That it was like, a return to doing these things in real life and not just generating them in a computer.
Yeah.
And it just, you can tell. You
can absolutely tell, I think. The feel is, and a lot of people loved Fury Road, to be fair.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying that's not the only reason that I would prefer to watch an 80s action movie over an action movie from today, but it's one of the reasons. It was, I think, maybe unquestionably, though, the era of the action star.
Yeah, that seems right.
Like, we don't, the action movies of today might be bigger because of CGI than in scope than the action movies of the 80s, but the stars are not.
No.
So I was trying to think of who the modern day action stars are.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple, maybe, but they're not anything like the ones that we had in the 80s in terms of their stature and influence.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
And just pure stardom.
Yeah.
So I have a list. Who would you think of off the top of your head?
You mean today?
Yeah, today. Who are like action stars of today?
I mean, Chris Hemsworth, right?
Yeah.
Sort of. The ones that pop to mind are people like Jason Momoa, Chris Hemsworth. But I guess maybe we're thinking more like, I don't know. Who do you think?
The only two I thought of that or I guess three, although one of them, there's one of them has a qualifier. The only two that I thought of where I thought like these are action stars like the action stars of the 80s.
I see. I guess those other two are not.
Jason Statham.
Sure.
And The Rock, Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, okay, that's true. I wasn't really thinking
because
that
they
way.
mostly just make action movies. That's what they do. That's what they're known for, and that's why. And people will go to see their movies just to see them perform.
That's
action.
true.
Then there's this whole other list. True. The third name, by the way, was Vin Diesel, but he really only makes Fast and the Furious movies anymore and he barely makes those. So, he's quasi-retired as of the recording of this podcast. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right on Statham and The Rock for sure.
But then there are a bunch of actors who do action movies, but I'm hesitant to call them action stars in the way that you can call like the old Schwarzenegger and Stallone of the 80s were action stars, right? And these are actors that do action movies, but also make so many other kinds of movies that that I don't just, when they say their name, I don't immediately think like, oh, that's the Schwarzenegger of today.
I guess the ones that I just mentioned.
Those are people like Chris Hemsworth, Ryan Reynolds, Jake Gyllenhaal, Chris Pratt, Tom Cruise, Liam Neeson, Charlize Theron, and Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Those people all make pretty high-profile action movies.
That's true.
Still. But I would hesitate to call any of them like a quote-unquote kind of action star.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
Because I think they're famous for doing too many other kinds of movies.
Yeah, I would never
I think of them
be
as
like...
actors who do action, not... A lot of the people we're going to talk about today, the action stars of the 80s, were not the greatest actors, really.
Not all of them, yeah. And it was what they did. You're right.
Yeah, and they were known. These people were known for just doing these kinds of movies.
They might occasionally do something not action, but it was pretty rare. Yeah.
So I thought what we might do today, Lisa's coming into this cold.
Yeah,
I did a little bit of prep by just brainstorming a list of action stars that I could think of from the 80s. And I thought maybe we would try to put together maybe a top 5. We could do something. We could maybe do a top 10, but maybe a top 5 action stars of the 80s and see if we could get some kind of canon, some kind of definitive list here.
Cool. Let's do it.
And so I have a list of actors and I have the list of the movies they made specifically during the 80s.
Oh, okay.
What I will say, 2 disqualifiers. We're concentrating really on American action movies.
Good point. Yeah.
So this disqualifies Jackie Chan,
right?
Who might be the biggest action star of the 80s.
He's amazing.
But really didn't become a name here until the 90s.
Yeah.
In the mainstream, because Rumble in the Bronx came out in the early 90s, and that was the first large-scale release for a Jackie Chan movie.
Right.
In the U.S. It also disqualifies like Michelle Yeoh and some of the people that work with her, and just some of the great like kung fu film artists, some of the great Hong Kong film artists of that era who made a lot of great movies in the 80s, but they just didn't penetrate the American consciousness, really, like the names I'm going to mention.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is they had to be big action stars in the 80s. And so this disqualifies people like Steven Seagal, who I think only made one movie in the 80s. It was a pretty good one.
Is that right?
But he came out at the very end.
He was more of a 90s guy.
He was a 90s guy. Wesley Snipes was a big action star in the 90s, but really also didn't really hit until the 90s. And weirdly, in the 80s, he was in more comedies.
Yeah.
So those are the 2 kind of disqualifiers, because I think a lot of people, when you mention these names, would think like, why aren't you talking about Steven Seagal? Because he was so part of this group.
Yeah. And there were plenty of big action stars.
But he was really a
90s
guy.
Yeah. The 90s was also a big time for action, but that's just not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So I'm going to start with the 2 big names, because I think there's going to be an argument maybe as to... This will be the hardest thing we have to figure out when we're putting together our little list here, is which one of these guys goes at number 1.
Yeah, I suspect I know which ones, but let's hear it.
So it's Schwarzenegger and Stallone.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So these guys were famously competitive in the 80s. There's a really funny story that Schwarzenegger tells where they were so competitive, they were looking at a lot of the same screenplays, and Schwarzenegger was sent the script for Stop or My Mom Will Shoot and thought it was the worst thing he had ever read.
Wow.
He was like, why would I do this garbage?
Yeah.
And he's like, wait a minute. And he's like, he told his agent to leak it out into the Hollywood cosmos that he really wanted to do it.
Oh, wow.
And Stallone, so that Stallone would hear of this.
Oh, my
And Stallone
God.
heard of it and then stole the movie from him.
Oh, my God.
And of course, it turned out to be horrible. And it was
what
just
a strategist Arnold was. That's crazy.
Totally unsurprising, though, when you know when you know about Arnold.
Like, I mean, not that I know him personally, but with some hindsight of his career at this point, you're like,
just
oh,
awareness of hearing him talk about, like, he's a
pretty smart guy.
Yeah, he's a very smart businessman.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was funny. They were very competitive, these 2 guys. They were, they talk about, I've seen them both talk about, like, how they would work out just to make their muscles look bigger, and like, oh, he killed this many people in that movie, so I've got to kill more people in my next movie.
This is so interesting. Okay.
Oh, they've both talked about this like intense rivalry between the 2 of them. And so Lisa and I are going to definitively, our small 2-bit podcast will make the final decision.
We are the arbiters
as to who was the great action star of the 80s. So are you ready? I've got the films.
Okay, let's hear it.
So it's just of the movies they released in that decade. So we can't talk about
90s or anything.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We can decide what we want our criteria to be.
Yeah.
And I don't. Part of that criteria could be if we wanted it to be like longevity, or at least how we think about them today.
I think that's
looking back on their career.
Yeah.
But we could also just say, who put out the best stuff, or who was the face of action.
Like,
in the
do we
80s.
go with contemporary to the 80s? Like, we just stop it there,
we
or
look
do
at
we
their
think about
work
longevity
and their persona then, or do we think about like what
question.
they've become? Although I'm not sure that makes it easier, because both these
No,
guys are
I
still
was
now
just
that they're
gonna
like
say,
elder
like,
statesmen, they both have a.
I don't think it does
They're both
help.
still working, and
Yeah.
they're both doing good stuff.
Yeah.
And
They're both highly regarded. I mean,
Yeah.
I know.
So here was Schwarzenegger's output
Okay.
in the 80s. He made a lot of movies.
I bet he did.
Conan the Barbarian,
Okay.
Conan the Destroyer, The Terminator,
Oh,
Red Sonja,
yeah.
Commando,
Yes.
Raw Deal, Predator, The Running Man, Red Heat, Twins, and then that's it. Total Recall in 1990.
Oh, and T2 with Terminator 2 wasn't
T2 was in 91.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Kindergarten Cop was in 1990 as well. 1990 was a big year for him.
Yeah.
Those were two big hits.
Okay. Okay, but we have to put them out of our mind.
But
Okay.
that's a lot. That's a lot.
And
I mean,
some
that's quite
big franchises in there.
Just some great classics in that list.
Yeah, 100%.
Sure.
Yeah.
Here's Stallone's output:
Okay.
Nighthawks, Victory, Rocky III,
Yeah.
First Blood,
Yeah.
Staying Alive, Rhinestone, Rambo, Rocky IV, Cobra, Over the Top,
Right.
Rambo 3, Lock Up,
Wow.
Tango and Cash, and then that's it. He makes Rocky V in 1990.
So you put Staying Alive in there, which is interesting. I mean, he directed that, and he's like,
Yeah, he has an uncredited cameo.
Do we? I mean, I don't know.
It doesn't matter, because it's not an action.
It's not
movie.
an action movie either. So wait,
So
what's
if
the
you look
numbers
at that
here?
list,
Okay.
only one Schwarzenegger movie is not an action movie, and that's Twins.
Right.
Right. So in Stallone's list, Rhinestone is
Yeah.
not an action movie.
No.
It's ostensibly a musical, although you can hardly call what you hear in that movie music.
I mean, it's a comedy, romantic comedy kind
Yeah.
of, right?
And Staying Alive, of course, not also a musical.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the rest of these are action movies. I mean, Victory is a World War II kind of escape from a prison camp adventure movie.
I think you could make
But you
the
can make
argument,
an
for
argument,
it.
I guess,
So
that it's
what
an
are,
action movie. And the Rockies are the Rocky movies action movies? I don't know. I think
mean-
people think of them that way because they're guys with muscles beating each other up. But
And he's such a hero, right? I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess I would think of it that way. So how did the numbers stack up between the two of them then, like in terms of how many movies?
in terms
they
of
made?
numbers,
Yeah.
it's pretty even.
Okay.
It's pretty even.
I wasn't keeping count, so. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you take away the franchises,
Oh, okay.
Rocky and Rambo, then that really cuts Stallone's output down. That leaves him with like Nighthawks, Victory, Cobra, Over the Top, Lock Up, and Tango and Cash. Although that's a pretty good output.
It's good. Well, also, I don't think you can cut out the franchises because Rambo is a huge action franchise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
in terms of like, Schwarzenegger might have done more, more different characters in more movies.
Oh, I see. Uh-huh. Interesting.
Red Heat, Running Man, Predator, Raw Deal, Commando, The Terminator, and Conan. Those were all different characters. Mm-hmm. He played a robot and a barbarian. I would argue that.
Yeah,
I would argue
true.
that maybe there's a little more range in what
Which is
Schwarzenegger did. Although
something that if he's... Yeah.
no one has ever said in history
No.
that Schwarzenegger played, because he played them all as a robot.
as
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
As himself,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know if range is the right
No, range is not
word
the right
here.
way.
And Stallone's a writer, and he's written some amazing stuff. But I guess
Yeah.
that doesn't really play
I mean, I would.
here.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question to me that the more talented guy is Stallone.
Right.
He's a great director, and he's an even better writer.
But I guess
and I
that's
think
not
he's
the...
also a better actor.
Yeah,
than
I think that's all
Schwarzenegger is.
true.
I mean, anyone who's seen like Copland,
Yeah.
like he's a real actor, and I don't know as much as I love Arnold. Arnold
right.
is more of a presence on screen
Yes.
than he is an actor.
And that's nothing to be sneezed at by
No,
any
not at all.
means. But yeah, no, you make a good point. And we're not really thinking about that, right? It's really about...
well, what are our
action star.
criteria? What makes a good action star to you?
Well, I think presence. I think you're right that
yeah.
presence is important.
So Cam, like relationship with the camera, right?
I guess so.
Presence on screen.
Yeah.
Authority,
very much so.
Appearance.
Yeah, you mean like muscles? Is that what we're talking about here? Or
not just muscles, but just like the whole picture, right? Chiseled jaw.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the voice. I mean, these are two guys that can barely speak, both of them, right?
They both have very distinct.
One's got this like thick accent. English is not his first language. The other one has famously this very slurry voice with also a thick accent.
I mean, they both have very distinguishable, like you know who you're hearing when you hear them talk. Yeah.
They're easy to do impersonations.
Yeah, good or bad. Yes.
Yeah. Get to the top.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Adrian. Yeah. I mean, you can do them both forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you distinguish? Let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
Somebody puts a gun to your head and says, who do you like better? Who do you pick?
Who do I like better? I mean, that's a different question than who's the best action hero, I think. Don't you? That's not the same question.
It's a place to start.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I like Stallone better because I like the Rocky movies quite a bit. And I also think he's a good actor and a good writer. So, but that's not the same as being the best action star, right? I mean, there's part of me that thinks you gotta go Arnold for number one action star of the 80s because isn't that what everybody thinks of? I mean, think about The Simpsons, McBain, right? That was Arnold Schwarzenegger as a Simpson, and he was, that was like the archetype of action star. I don't know. What do you think?
But
you're making me nervous.
But Rambo, man.
But Rambo, I know. But Rambo,
there wasn't
right?
I mean, there wasn't a character more synonymous with
true.
80s action than
true.
Rambo.
Right. This is like an impossible question to answer. You're right.
I mean, for God's sakes.
I know. Well, okay.
Maybe we hold off for the moment, but we agree that they're obviously 1 and 2. We just haven't decided which.
I don't know how you decide.
Let's see if we can.
Which ones?
Well, let's come back to it. Let's see if we can fill out the rest of the list.
Okay.
Here are some of the people, and I'm not even arguing that these people should all be on the list. I'm just going to tell you.
Okay.
Who I've got here.
Yeah.
Bruce Willis.
Okay. Yeah,
his
that makes
whole
sense.
Resume is predicated on one movie, but it might be the greatest action movie of all time.
I'm assuming this is
Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's easily one of the best action movies of all time.
Right. So does that just have more weight?
Does it get in just
yeah.
on John McClane? So it's a
could.
question.
Yeah.
It's a question to
yeah.
It's a question to answer later.
And he wasn't not in other action movies,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he was
not in the 80s though.
Oh, not in the 80s.
That was the only action movie he made in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay.
Carl Weathers.
Mm-hmm.
So Apollo
Creed. Yeah.
He did Death Hunt in 81, which is a great overlooked movie. Everybody should see it. It's a Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin movie. He was in Rocky 3, Rocky 4 in the 80s as Creed. He was also the right-hand man in Predator.
Oh, okay.
With Schwarzenegger, so he worked with both of them.
Right.
And at the end of the 80s, he had gotten big enough to get his own movie, which was Action Jackson.
Right.
He plays a cop in, I think it's Detroit. Vanity's in that movie. Craig T. Nelson plays the villain.
Wow.
It's hilarious. It's one blank square after another.
I haven't seen that movie. Sounds fun, though. Yeah.
So he has I think a lot of people think of him as a supporting player because he was, the second build in Predator and in the Rocky movies.
But look at him. He's in all, Stallone's not in both those movies.
But he's such a consistent supporting player that maybe he's 100%. Big enough to get in the list.
Plus Apollo Creed's great.
Creed is one of the great characters.
Yep.
Mel Gibson.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
So he makes a few, really in the 80s. He makes more action movies in the 90s, but in the 80s, he maybe gets in on the back of being both Mad Max and Martin Riggs.
That's from Lethal Weapon, right? I mean, and that's one of the most famous action movies, too.
So he's really only got 2, but they were franchises.
They're big deals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clint.
Of course. Okay.
In the 80s, Clint does Bronco Billy, Firefox, Honky Tonk Man, Sudden Impact, which is a Dirty Harry movie.
Okay.
Tightrope, which is a great movie that most people don't know about. It's a mystery thriller in New Orleans. Pale Rider.
Is that a Western? Okay.
Heartbreak Ridge, which is a military movie.
Okay.
Bird, which is a movie about jazz. White Hunter, Black Heart, which is about a hunter in Africa.
Okay.
and The Rookie. Oh wait, those were in 1990. So really, he does one Dirty Harry movie. He makes Firefox, which is a movie where he steals a jet from Russia or something.
Whoa.
He does Pale Rider, which is a Western. But really, if he's going in, it's probably because of Dirty Harry.
Right.
And I will say that Sudden Impact, the movie he did, is probably the movie a lot of people think about when they think about Dirty Harry, because it's the one where he says, "Make my day."
Oh, okay. As you know, I have a very hard time remembering which movies are Dirty Harry movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Charles Bronson.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
So he's busy in the 80s, making a lot of stuff with Canon Films.
Right.
The company we've talked about in other podcasts.
Yes.
The Israeli cousins, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, who made this low-rent sort of mini studio where they cranked out a lot of genre movies, like breakdancing movies and ninja movies.
Breakin'
So they had two big names in their stable during the 80s. They were both named Chuck. One was Chuck Norris and the other one was Charles Bronson.
Right.
And they really made their first big hit by picking up the license to Death Wish from Paramount and making one Death Wish sequel after another.
What was the first Death Wish movie Canon made?
Death Wish 2.
It was 2. Okay.
Yeah. And it made so much money that it really was the movie that allowed them to kind of become
who they were.
Who they became, yeah.
Huh, okay.
If that movie had tanked, they might have gone back to Israel and, we might never have gotten any of the movies that we got.
And Dustin would have been very sad.
I would have been very sad.
Yeah.
So he makes a lot of stuff. He makes Borderline, Death Hunt, the movie I just mentioned, Death Wish 2, 10 to Midnight, which is an insane cop thriller. The Evil That Men Do, Death Wish 3, which is one of the most bananas movies ever made.
Yeah.
Murphy's Law, which I love, is Assassination, Death Wish 4, Messenger of Death, and Kinjite, Forbidden Subjects.
Wow. I think the only one of those I've seen is Death Wish 3, so I'm going to have a hard time speaking to Bronson, but I understand who he is.
It's like one sleazy Canon Films thriller after another, some of which are pretty great.
Surely. But yeah, I only know the
although
one.
he was, he kind of sleepwalks through some of these movies, but that's also just sort of his thing.
His presence is
he didn't have a lot of
very close to
a lot of energy.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so Kurt Russell.
Oh,
Kurt Russell makes Used Cars, which is a comedy in 80, but then he makes Escape from New York, where he plays Snake Plissken, one of the great characters in all of action cinema.
Absolutely.
He does the Disney movie Fox and the Hound. Then he makes The Thing.
Yeah.
And then he does Silkwood, Swing Shift. That's the movie where he met Goalie. The Mean Season, which is a really overlooked, wonderful thriller. The Best of Times. Then he's back with Carpenter again for Big Trouble in Little China.
Yes.
And then he does Overboard. So he's got a lot of comedies here. And then he does Tequila Sunrise with Mel and Michelle Pfeiffer. And then he does a movie called Winter People. And then he does Tango and Cash at the close with Stallone.
Yeah, okay. I mean, for me...
So his bona fides are kind of the Carpenter movies.
Yeah, definitely.
Snake Plissken, Jack Burton in Big Trouble, and then
The Thing,
and then
also.
Tango and Cash, which is a movie a lot of people from that era really like.
Yeah. Well, and there's also The Thing. I mean,
and The Thing, yeah. Although that's not really an action movie, but yeah.
There's action in it, but yeah, I guess that's not really an action movie.
Okay, you ready? Harrison Ford.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Does Empire Strikes Back, Raiders, Blade Runner, Jedi, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Witness, Mosquito Coast, Frantic, Working Girl, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Presumed Innocent. So his action is really built on the back of Han Solo and Indiana Jones.
Of course. Yeah.
Everything else is kind of a comedy or a thriller.
Yeah. Speaking of range.
Yeah.
He's got it. Yeah.
But he might be one of those people, kind of like we were talking about earlier, that maybe he's more an actor that does action movies than he is an action star.
Yeah. Although those are two really important characters.
Yes, for sure. Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
has a cameo essentially in View to a Kill because he's dating
Oh, that's right.
Grace Jones at the time, but
Yeah.
breaks through in 85 in Rocky IV
Yeah.
as Ivan Drago, one of the great villains in 80s
Yes,
cinema.
of course.
2 years later, he's He-Man in Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, another canon classic.
And then he makes a bunch of low-budget movies, and direct-to-video movies, which kind of became his bread and butter. He does a movie called Red Scorpion, where he's a Russian soldier. He does a movie called The Punisher, which is a Marvel Comics character.
Oh,
He's the first version of that character.
Okay.
And then he does a movie that I really like called I Come in Peace,
Oh, yeah.
a.k.a. Dark Angel. It's
Right.
also called, where he faces off against this big blonde alien.
Right. Yes.
And
yes.
it was a straight-to-video movie that is way better than it has any right to be.
Yeah.
He's very charming and funny in it.
I mean, I do kind of think of him as an action hero. It's true. I think of him as like doing movies my brother watched.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
And then one that I'm sure is going to be on our list.
Okay.
He's got to be top 5. He might be
Okay.
number 3.
Okay.
Chuck Norris.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah, because he did nothing else.
Yeah.
So it's not like he was dipping into romantic comedies or
No.
anything. Of all the
Yeah.
actors we're talking about, even more so than Stallone and Schwarzenegger, he's
consistent.
single-minded in the kind of thing
Oh,
he was
yeah.
doing. So
100%.
And he's had a huge output. Listen to this.
Okay.
This is just the 80s. He makes The Octagon, An Eye for an Eye, Silent Rage, Forced Vengeance, Lone Wolf McQuade,
Yes.
Missing in Action, Missing in Action 2, Code of Silence, Invasion USA, The Delta Force, Firewalker,
Yeah.
Missing in Action 3, Hero in the Tear, and Delta Force 2.
Oh my God. I mean, I think
He
he's
was
number.
busy. He was
I don't
putting
even-
out like 2 to 3 movies a year, and they were all
Yeah.
action movies.
I don't think there's any discussion then. I'm sure he's number 3.
Yeah.
It can't be anybody else.
How have you come around on Chuck Norris?
Well, I mean,
Because you live with a Chuck Norris fan.
yeah. Well, that's maybe part of it. I haven't seen all those movies by any stretch that you just talked about, but I love Lone Wolf McQuade.
Yeah, it's a great Western.
That's pretty much it. Like I'm not, the canon movies are
Have you seen
fun.
any other Chuck Norris movies?
Sure, I have. I've seen Delta Force and Missing in Action, I think.
Really?
Well, I've seen Delta Force.
Have I shown you Code of Silence?
I don't know. I don't think
That's
so.
a good one. That's the only Chuck Norris movie that critics really liked.
Right.
It's by Andy Davis, who did The Fugitive
Oh,
and Under
okay.
Siege. So he
Right.
was working with a real director for that
that-
movie.
yeah.
He plays a Chicago cop who's fighting corruption
that
in
could be
the
good.
police force.
I could see that being
It's got
good.
like Dennis Farina and all these
oh,
great
yeah, the
Chicago
really
actors
good Chicago
in it.
actors.
What about Invasion USA? Have you seen
Wait,
that?
that's the one I've seen. Yes, I've seen that, and I've seen, I think, Delta
That's the
Force.
one where
I'm not sure I've
terrorists
seen.
invade America.
Yeah, I've for
but
sure
just
seen
a
that.
small part of Florida.
Yes. Which is the one where they blow up a real neighborhood?
Yeah, that's
It's that one.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that, and I think Delta Force is the other one I've seen.
Yeah.
Is that the one where Shelley Winters is on a plane?
Yes.
This is how I identify them. Those are the 3 that I think I've seen, that and Lone Wolf McQuade.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've seen Missing in Action. Maybe I haven't.
Yeah, I would be surprised if you had,
Yeah, probably not.
unless you're watching it without me.
What is the likelihood of
really
that?
unlikely.
Yeah. But I appreciate him now in a way that I did not. Before, again, he was like movies my brother watched, not me.
And how do you feel about Bronson? Because I'm a big Bronson fan
Yeah.
too, and
I haven't warmed up to him as much.
Uh-huh.
I've only seen Death Wish 3. I don't find him particularly compelling.
yeah,
I understand, I think, why people like him, I guess, but he's just not really for me
Not your thing.
as much. Maybe I just haven't seen the right Bronson
Yeah.
movie. I don't know.
Okay, we're almost through. Michael Dudikoff.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
So he has small parts in a bunch of movies at the beginning of the 80s, none of which are action films. Although he has a small part in Tron, weirdly. But then he's in Uncommon Valor, Bachelor Party. Oh, that's right. He's the pal in Bachelor Party. Him and Adrian Zmed.
A movie I can't watch. Okay.
But his action career really starts in '85 with American Ninja,
Of course.
the Canon Films
Yes.
classic.
Yeah.
And then he does Avenging Force, which I know you've
Okay.
seen because I've shown it to you.
Oh.
It's
sure
based
that I
on
have.
like it's him and Steve James in New Orleans. It's
yes.
kind of based on The Most Dangerous Game.
It's always
about
when
these,
you say
like,
New
old
Orleans.
white guys that that kidnap people and then hunt them in the swamps.
It's
of
always when you
Florida.
say New Orleans that I remember him like trudging around the swamps with a child or something. And
Yeah,
then I'm like,
and there's
oh
a
yeah,
scene.
I've seen this
There's a
movie.
scene in the Fat Tuesday parade.
Right,
the
Mardi
Gras.
Mardi Gras
Yeah.
parade. Okay, yes, I do remember this now. Yes,
Yeah.
I have seen it.
American Ninja 2, he does after that.
Okay.
And then he makes a war film called Platoon Leader. And then he does this kind of knockoff Indiana Jones thing called River of Death.
Oh.
And then it's into another American Ninja. So even though he's only active for like the back half of the decade, he's making quite a bit of stuff and it's all action and he's the lead. I find him really wooden.
Yes,
I
would
like
agree.
it. I like American Ninja and I like Avenging Force, but they're not because he's doing anything particularly compelling in them.
I guess he doesn't read much for me either. I
Yeah.
could take him or leave him for the most part. Yeah.
So then there's Seagal, who we can argue maybe gets in just on the one movie if we want. If we're gonna give Bruce Willis, if we're gonna put Bruce Willis in for Die Hard, then it's possible we could put Seagal in for Above the Law, which is the one movie he does in the 80s. He does it in 88.
Do you think that's as
And
good
that
as
movie
Die Hard?
that movie was it was a big hit
Yeah.
and it put him on the map. He wouldn't have made more movies.
Right.
The story of Seagal, which people may know or may not know, is that he was Michael Ovitz, who was the most powerful agent in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Seagal was his Aikido instructor.
Oh,
And
right.
Ovitz, who had the kind of power to do this, just thought, man, my Aikido instructor is a really cool guy. I bet he would be awesome in a movie. And then put him in like a multi-million-dollar action film from Warner Brothers, which is wild.
There's your story, kids.
Yeah. Above the Law was directed by Andy Davis, same guy that did Code of Silence.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
Again, an actual, real director. He should make every movie with him because he did Under Siege, too. Those are maybe the two best
These are the good Seagal movies.
Yeah. Okay, so then we have, I think this might be my last one on the list here. Yeah. Van Damme.
I was just going to say, does Jean-Claude make this list?
He does. I know you like JCVD.
I do like JCVD, yeah.
So here's what he does in the 80s. He's barely in Missing in Action. He's barely in Breakin'.
But he's so great for 2 seconds.
But his first big movie is he plays the villain in a couple of movies. He plays he's in a movie called No Retreat, No Surrender. And then he's in a movie called Black Eagle where he fights Sho Kosugi.
Whoa, wow.
Who maybe should be on this list.
Yeah, he probably should.
Yeah. And I can't believe I didn't think of him. I love Sho Kosugi. Sho Kosugi is the star of, he's the guy that brought ninjutsu to American cinema.
Kosugi. I thought maybe he wasn't
Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3, The Domination.
Yeah.
What was I thinking?
I was thinking maybe those were not in the 80s for some, I don't know why I was thinking
they
that.
were definitely
Okay.
80s.
No, I love Sho.
It was the canon 80s ninja.
I'm a big Sho fan. I love him. Okay.
So he's the villain in Black Eagle where he fights Sho.
Whoa.
But his big breakout is Bloodsport.
Yes.
It's pretty late in the decade. It's 88. But he squeezes in a few more movies. He makes Cyborg in 89 and Kickboxer, which is a great movie.
Yeah.
And then in the 90, he does a couple movies, Death Warrant and Lionheart. But he becomes really big in the 90s.
Yeah,
he
I mean,
made a lot of movies in the 90s.
He would definitely be in the top action stars of the 90s.
Yeah.
But I like him, so let's keep him in the 80s. Yeah.
And then these people I didn't put on the list, but I'm just going to give them honorable mention since we're speaking in a summarial way about action stars of the 80s. Vernon Wells from Road Warrior and Commando. He was the villain in both of those movies.
Okay.
He's also shows up at the end of Weird Science as the motorcycle gang villain. Weird Science. Jeanette Goldstein, who played Vasquez in Aliens.
Oh,
But she's
yeah.
also in
that's true.
She's in the Terminators.
Yeah.
She's in Lethal Weapon 2. Just a badass lady.
Yeah, it's nice to have a lady in here, which would be unusual in the 80s for sure.
Christopher Lambert,
Yes.
who was
right.
Tarzan in Greystoke,
Oh, yeah.
but was also the Highlander.
Yes.
Might be enough to get him into the list. He
Yeah,
went on
maybe.
to do, he did a underrated thriller called The Hunted and hit it big in Mortal Kombat a little later.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Sonny Landham, who was in
know who that
The
is.
Warriors, 48 Hours, Firewalker, Action Jackson, Lockup, and Predator.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Probably most famous of those roles was Predator. He plays the Native American guy who kind of senses that the predator is out there before everybody else.
I really should know my Predator better. I think I've only seen it once, so I don't know it terribly
Jesse Ventura, the former pro wrestler, but he was also in Predator and The Running Man. He was one of the stalkers in The Running Man.
Sure. Yep.
Bill Duke.
Yeah.
Also in Predator.
Of course.
Famously breaks the razor on his cheek and then climbs up the hill to kill the predator while he's losing his mind and starts screaming I'm going to have me some fun. I'm going to have me some fun.
See, I'm
going to have me some fun.
I can't quote Predator yet. I'm not at that level.
And who I had a fabulous run in, which I think I told that story on another podcast.
You may have, yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Peter Weller.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Who was both RoboCop and Buckaroo Banzai.
Wow.
So maybe that's enough to get him on the list.
Do you consider, is Buckaroo Banzai an action
I would
movie?
call Buckaroo Banzai an action movie. He
so.
fights off an alien invasion of the planet.
That's true. Good point.
Yeah. He's a samurai.
That's true.
Yeah.
Tests some kind of wacky sound barrier breaking car or something. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Timothy Dalton.
Oh, okay.
Who is James Bond in the back half of the 80s, but also the Prince in Flash Gordon.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Michael Biehn.
Of course.
Who is James Cameron's go-to guy in the 80s. He's in Aliens.
Right.
He's Kyle Reese in Terminator.
Yeah.
And he's in The Abyss. He's the villain in The Abyss.
Yeah.
So he had a busy 80s with James Cameron.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
And finally, Michael Pare.
Yes.
Who was Tom Cody in Streets of Fire, which we love.
Yes.
He's Eddie and Eddie and the Cruisers, which is not an action movie.
No.
But he then goes on to have a long career in straight-to-video stuff. He makes movies like Space Rage, Instant Justice, and World Gone Wild, which are these low-budget action movies.
They do sound like action movies. I have not seen any of them, but yeah.
So I don't know if you want to make an argument that we should consider any of them. I kind of had them in an honorable mention category. Some of them because they were supporting players or, they weren't quite, they were always they were never leads.
I appreciate you mentioning them. I don't quite remember
and some
where
of them
we
because
started
I
with
think of
honorable
them
mentions.
More as actors who do action.
I see. Yeah.
Like Timothy Dalton and Peter Weller.
Yeah. I think that's
Christopher Lambert. I mostly know those guys from action movies, but I don't necessarily just think of them as, I guess they're not the names that spring to mind.
I would agree, especially Timothy Dalton. I wouldn't be like, that's an action star right there. Yeah. Yeah.
Michael Biehn, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I know you're a big Michael Biehn fan.
I love Michael Biehn. Yeah. So that's our list. You want to review?
Yeah, I need a review.
It's Bruce Willis,
okay,
Carl Weathers, Mel Gibson, Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson, Kurt Russell, Harrison Ford, Dolph Lundgren, Chuck Norris, Michael Dudikoff, Seagal, JCVD, and Sho Kosugi.
Okay.
Here, I'll toss you the list.
That's okay. That's all right. You can just remind me as we go.
We decided that Arnold and Sly are number 1 and number 2.
In some order. We don't know yet. Yeah. Yeah.
So who else gets in?
Well, I think obviously Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris,
no question.
He's probably number 3, don't you think?
I would agree. If he only did action, and I think so many people equate him with action in the 80s, don't they? I mean, that's just, he's one of the icons.
Yeah. So who are you thinking for number 4?
I mean, this is where it's going to get tricky, and I'm going to need a little memory help, probably. You had Mel in there. You had Bruce Willis in there. Yep. I mean, those are two that would immediately spring to mind as 80s stars and definitely pretty popular for action.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. This is sort of it seems like to name a top action star, the thing they should be most famous for
is action.
Is just straight up action movies.
But what if it's just like Bruce Willis, for instance? He's so famous for Die Hard.
He is, but he's also famous for moonlighting.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah. At that time.
I mean, he went on to become a big action star.
This is where the question of longevity comes in,
but we're talking about
right?
action stars of the 80s. Isn't he more of an action star of the 90s, you could argue?
Well, see, this is where
because he only made one action movie in the 80s. So do you really put him in ahead of somebody like Charles Bronson, who made like one movie after another through the entire 80s that were all action movies, or Dolph Lundgren or JCVD.
Yeah.
It seems...
Yeah.
It
Well, what do you think?
It doesn't ring right with me somehow.
Yeah.
Although Die Hard is worth more than all the movies made by all those people put together. So I don't know.
As an action. I mean, so many people.
And Bruce Willis was hugely responsible for why that movie is so great. It's a great premise, but John McClane is the hero.
Yeah.
You know?
Doesn't that movie have a lot of staying power too? I mean, people watch it to this day.
Yeah.
As a Christmas movie for the most part. But
whereas maybe most people can't even name a JCVD movie.
Which is too bad.
80s. Yeah.
Because
they should know Bloodsport, if nothing else.
Agreed. I don't know. I mean, that's, What do you think?
Maybe we can eliminate some.
Okay.
Maybe we eliminate Carl Weathers because even though he was awesome, he was more of a supporting player.
Good to call him out, though.
Think?
He's great. Yeah.
Maybe we cut Mel, Mad Max, and Martin Riggs. But he did so many other things.
I mean, also Lethal Weapon and Mad Max are some major iconic 80s movies.
Maybe we
80s
cut Clint
movies.
because he did more kind of mystery thrillers.
I think so.
Yeah.
I love Clint, but I don't think
maybe we cut Kurt Russell.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, Tango and Cash was a big movie, but it was no Die Hard.
No.
If we're going to put somebody in for one or two movies.
Okay.
Harrison Ford did a lot of stuff that wasn't action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also don't purely think of those movies, like Star Wars movies, as action movies in the same way that I think of like Predator and Commando and Rambo as action movies.
No, they're not like 80s action movies in a way when you think of that. Yeah, I think that's true.
We cut Seagal because if we're not putting Bruce Willis in for one movie, we're not going to put Seagal in for one movie, right?
I think certainly not. I don't think Above the Law is better than Die Hard.
So that leaves Bruce Willis, Mel Gibson, Charles Bronson, Dolph Lundgren, Michael Dudikoff, JCVD, and Sho Kosugi. Maybe we cut Dudikoff just because he's not that great.
I'm okay with cutting him.
He's a little
interesting
airless
to me
compared to the other guys.
Wait a minute, but did you say we were taking Bruce Willis out because he only has one movie, like Steven Seagal?
Well, you argued me into keeping him for the moment.
I mean, yeah, okay.
So we've got number 1 and 2 is Arnold Sly. Number 3 is Chuck Norris.
Okay.
So in our top 5, we have 2 more slots.
Oh, boy.
And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys.
Okay, 6
we've got
people.
Bruce, Sho, Mel, Charles B., Dolph, and JCVD.
Okay. Well, do we have any criteria
in a personal
to work
way? I'd make an argument for Sho Kosugi, and here's why. Because even though he's maybe not the household name that these other guys are, he's pretty much solely responsible for an entire craze that expanded beyond movies.
Yeah.
In the 80s, right? There were ninja cartoons.
Yeah.
There were ninja toys. Mm-hmm. There were ninjas showing up in the Karate Kid cartoon. There were
kids went around wearing ninja costumes.
I had a ninja outfit. I used to play with nunchucks.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah. It was a craze. It was 100% a craze.
And they would not have come to the 80s had it not singularly been for him and Canon Films.
Well, and this is
he made the greatest ninja movie of all time, which is Revenge of the Ninja. And he made a couple of the... 2 that would be 2 or 3 that would also be in the running on that short list.
I love Revenge of the Ninja, as you know. Also, I mean, this is a man whose stunts, they're amazing.
Yeah.
He does them all.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. Unlike most of these guys,
stuntman.
he's doing all his own stunts.
And he's amazing. So, I'm fine with it. Also, I think more people should see his movies.
Yeah,
so
I would put him in at 4.
Okay. Show it 4.
Okay, so that leaves 1 slot in our top 5. And we've got Bruce, Mel, Charles Bronson, Dolph Lundgren, and JCVD.
Yeah. Wow.
I know they're the more famous guys, but again, I'm going to argue against Bruce and Mel.
So we're not thinking longevity here in terms of...
No, I think it's just like who epitomized action in the 80s.
I think I know who my choice is then, maybe.
I mean, maybe I would argue for Bruce more than Mel, even though Mad Max was a big deal.
That's interesting.
And in Lethal Weapon, just because Die Hard. It's just John McClane is just he's an all-American hero.
Yeah.
We're talking about American action movies here.
Yeah, that's true.
The Road Warrior movies are so Australian.
Yeah.
They're so of
They're such great action,
place.
though.
They are. They're incredible.
Yeah, anyway, but I see your point.
But are they incredible because of Mel Gibson?
No.
I mean, he's good in them.
It's George Miller.
Yeah.
It's the direction.
It's the cars.
And
it's
the cars,
it's the stunts, you know. It's the chase scene.
The whole world. Yeah. I mean, all of it. Yeah. No, that's true. That's
I mean, the fact that Fury Road is probably the best
true.
Mad Max
There's
movie.
There's no Mel Gibson
Mel's not in it.
Yeah, that's a good
kind
point.
of tells you maybe that it's not Mel that
That's
sells
a good
the
argument.
movie.
It's a good argument. Yeah.
I would argue that Lethal Weapon is not Lethal Weapon without him.
No, I think that's true.
But yeah.
Okay.
So that leaves Bruce Willis, Charles Bronson, Dolph Lundgren, and JCVD.
Yeah.
What did I say Dolph Lundgren did? So he did...
he did a lot of straight to video, you said, along with everything else.
So, he did... So he was Ivan Drago.
Yeah, of course.
So he's one of the great villains
yes.
of the 80s. And then he's He-Man, although that movie tanked, although it's kind of beloved by people of a certain age.
There's also not a lot of action in it, to be fair. Right? In He-Man?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
He's fighting Beastman and Skeletor. And,
okay, yeah.
And then he goes straight to video. So maybe he's off the list.
I mean, I have a lot of respect for him.
He was huge in the 90s, though. Like
he was
getting...
Yeah.
I remember reading an article about him at the time.
Yeah.
That he had kind of disappeared, like, from movie screens, but reading that he was one of the highest paid actors in the world.
Because of straight to video.
Because he was making these movies overseas, and they would just pay him a fortune to come in, and he was making like 5 or 6 movies a year.
Wow.
And he was making millions off of each movie because his name was so big around the world.
Yeah.
And these movies were like huge hits in other countries, and we're just not playing here. He was like one of the biggest kind of stars in the world. Jackie Chan was similar, right? Like Jackie Chan was a massive star everywhere in the world except for the U.S.
Until I mean, he became a big star here, but
until Rush Hour and stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that leaves JCVD,
yeah,
Charles Bronson, and Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, I know I don't really have a lot of affection for Charles Bronson, so I can't make a case for him. I'm sure you can make a really great case for him. But maybe that's not what it's about. It's like how much you like the person, I guess. Yeah.
Here's the case for Bronson.
Yeah.
It's part of its output, right?
Sure.
He just made a lot of movies, and they were all action movies.
Yeah.
So if we're, again, that puts him and JCVD ahead of Bruce in that sense, that it was all they did was action movies. And granted, most of them weren't huge hits, but he was kind of like the face of Canon Films in a way. And that vigilante character, Paul Kersey, was a huge character.
From Death Wish,
I mean, people still, whenever there's any discussion of kind of like vigilante justice or mob justice or anything like that, even to this day, people still reference, if not that character, they'll say, oh, this is Death Wish, right?
Right.
He was like the face of taking the law into your own hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
he was, in previous decades, he was a Western star. That was what he was known for.
Right.
And by some accounts, if you read about that, he wasn't super happy with the kinds of movies he was doing.
You mean the Canon
for
films?
Canon. He was kind of doing them for the money. His wife had cancer.
Oh, yeah.
But they were, they kept him, they let him kind of run the show, let him do what he wanted.
They would like drive him around in a golf cart, right?
Well, yeah, that was a great story from Alex Winter.
Yeah, Death Wish
Bill
3.
from Bill and Ted. He's one of the hoods in Death Wish 3.
Punks.
And he tells the story. He's like, it was like watching a guy golf more than act because he would get picked up in a car at his trailer and then driven like 40 feet.
Like a golf cart,
to the stage, and then get out and like barely emote and then go back to his trailer.
Right.
So, not the warmest guy by all accounts. Not a particularly social guy. But you can't argue that he doesn't have presence on
he sure
screen.
does. I mean, he
does a lot with a little. Like, he doesn't even have a lot of dialogue, right?
Right. I mean, he's a lot of people love him. A lot of people, he's definitely a thing.
Yeah. I know you have a soft spot for Van Damme, but is it all based on Bloodsport?
No, I mean, I guess I haven't seen a lot of his 80s output. I also really like the hockey movie and the Time Cop one. I like those. Yeah. I like those movies a lot too. Although those I think are 90s, but
they are.
But I mean, it's not the only movie I like. Bloodsport. I like those other movies too, and I like his presence. I think
the argument for crossing him off the list would be that he really finds his footing in the 90s.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
That he's maybe more of a 90s.
It's tough for me.
Maybe he's
I like
not
him.
an 80s guy.
I think he's just got more.
He doesn't show up until 88, really.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So maybe he's out for the 80s.
Okay. I think he would definitely be on a 90s
I mean,
list.
you and I have talked about this before, that the end of the 80s in some ways didn't even feel like the 80s. Right? That it started to feel that transitional
period. It's like every decade
period.
Has a transitional period, sure. Yeah.
But the music was starting to change, right?
Of course.
Right? We were starting to move away from new wave and
Yeah.
Okay, so that leaves Charles Bronson and Bruce Willis.
Yeah. I mean, I think you want Charles Bronson.
I think I do too, but I'm
he's
not
just not my favorite. So
but we can vote. I mean, I'm not going to. I won't. Well, it'll be a 1-1, I guess.
I don't think we can vote. I don't think that works.
We can have them tie. We can say 5 is a tie between Bruce, who made one great movie, and Charles, who made 1 million mediocre movies. And so maybe that's what makes them tie.
Maybe, yeah. I guess. I mean, I just like Die Hard a lot, but I would watch it.
Okay, so we close by returning to the question that we opened with, which is Arnold versus Sly. Who wins? It sounds like you were making an argument for Arnold, but I can't remember why.
Well, I think I was making an argument for Arnold because, although you made the same argument with Rambo, that he's like the archetype icon of like an 80s action hero. Like I was thinking of The Simpsons having McBain, right? And McBain is basically Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that's their stand-in for a big action hero, right?
But think of how many things have used Sly.
No, I mean you made the same point. Yeah, that's true.
In Hollywood Shuffle, it's
Rambo, right? It's Rambo. So
So and they each had 2 big characters, right?
Yes.
Schwarzenegger had Conan and the Terminator. And Stallone had Rocky and Rambo.
Rocky and Rambo are bigger deals than, I mean, the Terminator is obviously a big deal, but Conan, I think less so, right? Overall.
Yeah.
As much as I know
he
you
played
love
him
Conan.
essentially 3 times in the decade, which is amazing.
I'm not saying it's not a big, but I feel like Rocky and Rambo are much more universally known than Conan, perhaps. Yeah.
I think Arnold had better quips, better catchphrases.
I mean,
Stallone has nothing that comes anywhere near "I'll be back."
No, that's true.
In his career,
Adrian
maybe.
But even
that's not as good. as "I'll be back." Come on.
I mean, I guess that's why. Again, I love Sly. I'm a big Sly fan. I generally think he's just, as you said, the better actor. It's just that Arnold is such an archetype, I think.
So we're going to say
I don't know.
that the guy that made Tango and Cash, Lock Up, Over the Top, Cobra, Rocky and Rambo was the second best action star of the 80s.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think we are. I think I'm with you.
You think we're saying that?
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's what we're saying. Only because, again, Red Heat, Running Man, Predator, Raw Deal, Commando, Terminator, and 2 Conans.
Yeah.
It's a pretty unassailable CV.
Yeah. In terms of action.
In terms of action, yes.
I think that's,
All right,
true.
So we've done it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's definitive. This issue has been put to bed forever, if it was an issue. You can now, future civilizations that are doing research on this subject can consult this podcast for the once and final word on this. The top 5 are: number 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger; number 2, Sly Stallone; number 3, Chuck Norris; number 4, Sho Kosugi.
Woo.
He's like our dark horse.
Yes.
And number 5, a tie between Bruce Willis and Charles Bronson.
Yeah.
How do you feel? You feel pretty good about that list?
I feel
like it's a pretty good list.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say this. We identified that there's maybe only 2 or 3 guys that current day, The Rock, Statham, and Vin Diesel that are still doing having this kind of career. And even they kind of do other things. All three
definitely.
of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say none of them is as good as like the guys that would have come in 9th or 10th on this list had we stretched this list.
Yeah. I mean, they have different strengths, I think, and they can be really funny, The Rock and Statham. But no, it's just not the same.
It's just not the same.
Just
a different era.
Different era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a documentary I'll recommend for people that like 80s action called In Search of the Last Action Heroes. Mm-hmm. Made by a British filmmaker whose name is escaping me, but it's kind of a fun trot through the 80s of looking at these kind of somewhat brain dead, high body count, cool guy action movies.
Those would be the things they would be lampooned for when you do see those lampoons. It's
for
all
sure.
of that stuff. The brainlessness, the body count, the what was the other thing you said? The cool guy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The muscles.
All right. On that note, we'll just say we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.